According to a new Marist-NPR-PBS Newshour poll, man, these poll titles are getting long, Republicans are more enthusiastic about upcoming midterms than both Democrats and independents. 84% of registered Republican voters said they were very interested in the election, compared to 68% of Democrats and just 58% of independents.
Meanwhile, a new Harris X poll reveals independent voters are more likely to say Republicans did a better job choosing candidates, with 33 choosing Republicans compared to 28 for Democrats. 1 in 4 independent respondents, however, said neither party did a good job. So will either party be able to convince independents to turn up at the voting booth next week? Joining us now to discuss is host of Straight Shot, No Chaser podcast, Tezlyn Figaro. Welcome back, Tezlyn.
Always glad to be here. Thank you.
So what, in your view, is the best pitch that should be made to independents right now?
Yeah, it's really hard to determine who is an independent. I am, by the way, but I have been for the last decade. So really just throwing out a pitch with less than 7 days to go to the polls, I don't think that will happen. This is really just about using the pitch analogy, football analogy. It's about who has literally, well, that's a baseball analogy, actually. It really has been about who has been able to throw the ball and who's been able to move the ball on policy. And so, unfortunately, this is just the reality. I was reading an article from Politico the other day where President Biden went to Florida and was talking about Social Security, which he should be because that's very relative to Florida. But Charlie Crist was talking about abortion, which is not something that relates to seniors. And Florida is, as we know, a state that's heavily populated with seniors. So Democrats are still off message, and I don't know that that will change within the next 7 days. So it seems that, folks are just really just grasping for straws and hoping that people show up. But I will say this, because everything's not doom and gloom. It is important to know that Georgia has reportedly turned in more voters have came to the polls early voting more so than in 2018. And so that was something, Bree, that I was not expecting that has definitely happened, at least in the state of Georgia. So I guess it really depends on where you are.
Yeah, we had a segment today about the high turnout rate. It's 20% higher than it was for early voting in 2018. The guest was a little reluctant to weigh in on whether or not he thought it would bear out in positive outcomes for Democrats in particular. But you seem to think that that is a good sign for Democrats. Do you think that, are you inclined to believe that Warnock and Abrams are similarly benefiting from that increased turnout? Or do you think they're going to kind of win or lose in lockstep? Or could there be a situation where Abrams, who is performing less well in the polls, still succumbs while Warnock ekes it out?
Yeah, I don't know why the other person was reluctant to chime in on it, because we have the facts or previous, at least, data. It's always not, it's not always accurate, to a T, as you know, it's not Bible. But we do know that early voting tends to swing towards the left. It tends to swing toward Democrats. And I also want to make this point, because you'll hear this talking point a lot, that, those are just absentee ballots. But that's not the case. There has actually been more in-person voting, 1.5 million compared to 1.8 million on the same day of this same week, Monday. I'm referring to Monday, actually. So even just the in-person voting, not even counting the absentee ballots, it is historic, usually to lean towards the left and lean towards Democrats. So based on the numbers, yeah, but we also know the Republicans show up same day and they early vote as well. And we cannot take for granted that all of the early voting that is typically leaning left, that some of those folks are not switching over. Very interesting. I wish we had more time to talk about the lockstep thing, because it was a little bit more clear before when it was, vote for Warnock and Ossoff. But now, because there is two totally different candidates with Stacey Abrams and Warnock, and when I mean totally different candidates, I mean actually who they're going against, in particularly Herschel Walker. I don't know if it will necessarily be a straight down Democrat ballot that people will choose. But that's typically, what we see. But there are folks who are starting to say, I'm going to vote issue by issue and look at who is the best person for the job. And I don't know if that's necessarily always going to be governor and senator at the same time, because they're two different jobs. And I encourage people to understand the difference between the two jobs and to pick the right candidate for either or.
Well, The Hill's Hannah Trudeau reports this week that progressives are critical of Democrats' strategy in recruiting rural voters. 2008, as liberals were expressing a rush of enthusiasm following the Obama victory, Republicans were already laying the groundwork in rural towns and counties meant to stretch beyond his administration, according to Trudeau. Progressives say Dems never quite caught up. Does that ring true to you, Tezlyn?
Well, absolutely, but progressives are in no position to talk because progressives never caught up either. So there's a lot of work that progressives need to do. Right now, there is really no progressive bench in 2024. If I were to ask you who is running in 2024, who would possibly run for president if President Biden does not run again, or who would possibly challenge him, most progressives don't have an answer. So progressives also, not only have they not caught up, they haven't and exceeded it, they haven't caught up as well. So progressives need to worry about what progressives are bringing to the table. But I will say that, yes, the GOP has made a significant amount of investment, not just in rural communities, but even in urban communities. I was watching last week that they have literally, and this is in particular when we talk about the diversity vote, they have invested over 30 plus diversity centers, brick and mortar centers that are actually reaching out to voters in those particular areas in Georgia. And over 20 of them, Bree, have been focused directly on the Latino vote. So when you look at the GOP and you look at what they're doing to say, hey, we just need a little bit in order to shift the numbers. And then you ask Democrats, what are you doing in response? Their answer was, well, we're putting a lot of money in radio and television. That's not a good enough answer. And to be clear to those in the comments, because I know the comment consultant caucus loves talking about what they heard instead of what they know. The reality of it is, those of us who have been on the left, the reason why I left the Democrat Party in 2010, we have always begged, literally begged for them to really put the investments in those same types of centers in the community to engage year round. And I also encouraged the Bernie Sanders movement to do it as well. When he lost in 2016, Bree, imagine if he would have kept those same organizers on the ground, in particular in South Carolina, to actually work in the community. It would have been a much easier path for him in 2020. So we can only just continue to keep blaming the establishment and blaming the elite. Some of this really does have to do with on the ground and knocking on doors. And being on Twitter is not enough to win a campaign. And the GOP is they see that, they understand that, and they know they only need a slight edge in order to make a difference.
Yeah, completely agree. The proof is in the pudding. Where Bernie did do that in Nevada, got there a year in advance and worked in the community, more results. He won the state. He won 70% of the Latino vote. He did not do that pretty much anywhere else in the country. Certainly didn't do that with the Black community. And now Joe Biden is the president of the United States of America. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tezlyn.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.